Our story begins in the mists of prehistory. Long before the great empires of Rome or Greece existed, ancient hunter-gatherers arrived on these shores after the last ice age. Over thousands of years, they mastered the land, building massive, astrologically aligned stone tombs, like the famous Newgrange, which predates the Egyptian pyramids. By the Iron Age, the Celts established a shifting patchwork of dozens of warring clans, kingdoms, and territories across the island. These independent chieftains and high kings governed from the legendary Hill of Tara, relying on druidic priests to pass down their history through spoken word rather than written books. A cultural shift arrived in the 5th century AD with a young Christian missionary named Patrick. He had been kidnapped by Irish pirates and forced into slavery as a boy, but he eventually returned to convert the pagan chieftains. St. Patrick famously used the 3-leafed shamrock to explain the concept of the Holy Trinity. Following this conversion, the island grew into a center of learning known as the Isle of Saints and Scholars. While the rest of Europe struggled through the chaotic Dark Ages following the fall of Rome, Irish monks safely preserved classical knowledge in remote monasteries, creating breathtaking illuminated manuscripts like the Book of Kells. In the late 8th century, terrifying longboats appeared on the horizon. The Vikings arrived as raiders, plundering wealthy coastal monasteries, but eventually stayed to found major cities like Dublin and Limerick. Their political power on the island finally broke at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, where the Irish High King Brian Boru won a decisive victory at the cost of his own life. Despite centuries of internal clan warfare and Viking incursions, Ireland remained a fiercely independent and wealthy prize sitting just across the Irish Sea. In the spring of 1171, the English king, Henry II, sailed from England and landed in Waterford with a massive retinue of heavily armed knights. He used this military intimidation to demand that the Irish kings and chieftains submit to his rule. At the Synod of Cashel, Irish religious leaders officially recognized Henry's sovereignty, making Ireland the very first colony of England. Political control soon evolved into cultural erasure. By the 16th and 17th centuries, the British government implemented a policy known as the plantations. Irish Catholics were forced off their ancestral lands, which were then redistributed to English and Scottish Protestant settlers. The native Irish became second-class citizens in their own homeland. Resentment triggered an explosive Irish rebellion in 1641. While a planned coup in Dublin failed, the violence spilled into the countryside. Retaliation from British and Scottish forces was horrific. On Rathlin Island, Scottish soldiers threw hundreds of Catholic women over steep island cliffs to their deaths. The conquest intensified with the arrival of Oliver Cromwell in 1649. Cromwell viewed the Catholic faith as a corruption to be eradicated. His troops massacred nearly 3,500 people at Drogheda and Wexford, and the subsequent Act for the Settlement of Ireland legally stripped Catholics of almost all remaining land. This cycle of land theft and poverty culminated in the 1845 Great Famine. A blight struck the potato crop, the primary food source for the impoverished Catholic population. While over 1 million people starved to death or fled on coffin ships, British landlords continued to export grain and livestock out of the country for profit. The famine permanently altered Ireland's demographics, halving the population and leaving a legacy of deep-seated bitterness. This trauma, combined with centuries of land theft and military massacres, fueled a nationalist movement that would spend the next several decades organizing for a final, armed break from British rule. The 19th century saw a shift toward political resistance. Earlier military uprisings, like the 1798 rebellion, had been crushed by British artillery, so the statesman Daniel O'Connell fought for Irish rights through the law. His efforts led to the Roman Catholic Relief Act of 1829, allowing Catholics to serve in Parliament for the first time in centuries. By the 20th century, the demand for reform became a demand for absolute independence. In the 1918 election, the radical nationalist party Sinn Féin, led by Eamon de Valera, won a staggering 73 of the 105 Irish seats. Instead of taking their places in the British Parliament, they stayed in Dublin to form their own renegade government. To defend this new parliament, they formed the Irish Republican Army. Under the tactical leadership of Michael Collins, the IRA began a sophisticated campaign of targeted guerrilla warfare, using ambushes and intelligence to neutralize British rule. Britain responded by deploying paramilitary soldiers, nicknamed the Black and Tans. The Anglo-Irish War turned into a brutal conflict of raids and reprisals, as the British attempted to crush the resistance through sheer force. This violence reached a peak during the 1920 Bloody Sunday. In the morning, the IRA assassinated 14 British intelligence agents in Dublin. That afternoon, the Black and Tans retaliated by opening fire on a crowded Gaelic football match at Croke Park, murdering 14 innocent civilians. Rural ambushes, like the one at Kilmichael, further humiliated the British military. In December 1920, British forces retaliated by setting the city of Cork on fire, burning the heart of the city into smoldering ruins. Collins' strategy of asymmetric warfare made the island ungovernable. The British Empire, unable to secure a military victory, was finally forced to negotiate the release of its oldest colony. The resulting 1921 treaty established the Irish Free State, but it came with a heavy cost: partition. 6 predominantly Protestant northern counties chose to remain part of the United Kingdom, creating a physical border across the island. This compromise triggered a tragic Irish Civil War between those who accepted the treaty and those who demanded absolute freedom. The conflict claimed the life of Michael Collins, assassinated by his own former comrades. While the South eventually became the Republic of Ireland, the North remained fractured. In the 1960s, deep societal divisions between Unionists and Republicans erupted into decades of sectarian conflict known globally as the Troubles. Britain sent its army into the north to quell the unrest, but many viewed the troops as an occupying force. The conflict hit a low point in 1972, during yet another Bloody Sunday, when British paratroopers killed 14 unarmed civilians during a civil rights march in Derry. For over 30 years, bombings, targeted assassinations, and military checkpoints were the terrifyingly normal reality for those living in the north. The colonial legacy of partition created a zero-sum territorial dispute, trapping both sides in a cycle of violence that proved incredibly difficult to break. Peace finally arrived with the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. These signatures represent a multi-party consensus that established a power-sharing framework, largely ending the decades of bloodshed. With the violence of the past receding, the Republic of Ireland underwent an economic transition known as the Celtic Tiger. The country grew from an impoverished agricultural state into one of Europe's wealthiest and most technologically advanced modern nations. Ireland served as the original testing ground for British imperialism. Yet, through centuries of famine and war, the Irish people dismantled the colonial blueprint and outlasted the empire that attempted to erase them.